guys, welcome to She Knows Arsenal. My name is Jessica and I'm your host, and you can follow me on Twitter at It's Jessinho. You guys give me 1 second. I just want to send out the tweet. Oh, so lame. Why didn't I do this before? Sorry, guys. Give me 1 sec. Okay. So on today's show, we're going to be talking about our loanees, how they're doing, and kind of talk about who could stay and who will probably sell. I think it's the perfect time to do this because we're getting towards the end of the season. Players like Willock and Ainsley Maitland-Niles are playing well on their respective loans, and we're getting closer and closer to the transfer window. So the talk around, who could stay and who could go is kind of, heating up a little bit. And honestly, I'm just done talking about if we're going to sell or not, in terms of the club. Like, let's talk about something else, So how is everybody doing? If you're in the chat box, let me know where you're watching in from and how you're doing this morning/afternoon. So the first thing I kind of want to talk about is the homegrown player quota. I think that's something that needs to kind of be addressed before we start talking about who we're going to sell and who's going to stay in terms of the loanees, because, as luck would have it, a lot of our homegrown players are actually players that we're looking to maybe move on. So the amount of players that we have in terms of homegrown versus non-homegrown will actually have an effect on whether we're able to sell certain players or not. So just the definition of a homegrown player is defined by the Premier League is a player who is 21 or older on January 1st of the year in which the season begins, and B, spent 3 years between the ages of 16 to 21 in a team in the English football system. So those are the two, factors that matter. So Bukayo Saka wouldn't count as a homegrown player because he turns 20 in September. And even though Emile Smith-Rowe turns 21 in July, he also wouldn't count. It wouldn't count either because he would have needed to be 21 in before the year started. So it's kind of confusing. But let's say if Emile Smith-Rowe had turned 21 in December, then yeah, it would have counted. But because he turns 21 in July and the year has already begun, it wouldn't count. So we can't count those players in our homegrown quota. And exactly, Tony is saying it here. It's going to be key. As I was looking at everybody's birth dates and things like that, and I was like, okay, well, Emile Smith-Rowe turns 21 in July, but it clearly says that they need to be 21 or older on January 1st of the year in which the season begins, and that would be 2021. So he wouldn't actually count as a homegrown player in the season of 2021-22. Guendouzi actually would count in regards to these rules because he will have been at Arsenal for 3 years, from 2018 to 2021, and he's already 22 years old. So he would actually count, which is really interesting. And it says that each Premier League team can only register 25 players over the age of 21 for that season's first team matches. Of those 25 players, no more than 17 can be non-homegrown players. In other words, if you want the full complement of 25, which we probably will need, because we have a very bloated squad, over 21 players, you have to have at least 8 homegrown players. So we're in a position where we're going to have those 25 players. So we're going to need to be really, really smart. So based on that, Bellerin, Callum Chambers, Holding, Maitland-Niles, Joe Willock, Nketiah, Nelson, and Guendouzi, as far as I know, are our homegrown players that would qualify for that, which is exactly 8. And it just so happens that the majority of those players are ones that we want to sell. Bellerin, Callum Chambers, Maitland-Niles, Willock, Nketiah, and Guendouzi. So, it's just, and Yo-Yo even says, like, missing out on European football will make things worse. It will. So the idea that we're going to be able to sell like 10 players isn't realistic because everybody's going to be trying to sell their players. So if we can only get rid of, like, let's say we get rid of Bellerin, it's probably going to end up that whoever we bring in is going to have to fit into that homegrown quota. Whoever comes in for Tierney as the left back cover will probably also have to be homegrown to make up the numbers if we were to sell Ainsley, Bellerin, all these players that we want to go ahead and move on. So I think it's important for Arsenal fans to understand the homegrown quota and how important it is, especially because we have such a bloated squad, to ensure that we have the right numbers so we're not registering people, which is what we ended up having to do at the beginning of this season with Ozil and Socrates. So that being said, let's just kind of we're going to talk about Guendouzi, Maitland-Niles, Willock, and Saliba and Torreira, because those are the players that are out on loan that I think may have a chance to come back based on what kind of happens. And, I would talk about Mavropanos, but I don't think he's coming back. I think he'll stay at Stuttgart for another loan spell, but the other ones are kind of up in the air. Guendouzi, as we all know, is on loan at Hertha Berlin, and his contract with Arsenal actually expires on June 30th, 2022. So he'll have a year left on his contract at the end of this season, which makes it even more imperative that we make a decision on him. His current value at the moment is 22 million. And what was funny is when I was looking at how his value has kind of fluctuated, went up and down. In 2019, the peak value was like 50 million. I think we kind of remember those days where he was playing a lot of games. He was getting a lot of hype. He actually got called into the senior French national team. So those were different days. Those were very different days. And seeing the kind of the value destruction of Matteo Guendouzi is kind of upsetting a little bit. It's disappointing because knowing that we could have gotten maybe 40 million for this kid just a couple years before is like, because we don't even know what we would be able to sell him for now. And I don't necessarily feel like the value destruction is just from the club. I think they did have a part to play in that when all the news of him kind of being a rebel per se was coming out in the media, as well as, a lot of it has to do with Guendouzi, his personality is one that you can't really ignore him. So you can kind of see, when he's making mistakes, and he doesn't come off as not that he's not likable, but he comes off a little bit immature. He's also, been described by the Hertha Berlin coach as somebody that is going through football puberty, and he's 22 years old. Although that's young, footballers grow up quick. They start their actual career at like 16, 17 years old. So he should be more mature than what he is now. But hearing that he went from Lorient to where did he go? He went PSG, Lorient, and kind of bounced around, then came to us, and then now is on loan at Hertha Berlin. And we're hearing the same stories kind of over and over again about his attitude and being kind of immature. It just leads me to believe that that's the kind of person that he is, which is kind of weird that he's actually the captain of the under-21s team. But nevertheless, his value destruction has come from many different things. But nevertheless, his value has really diminished over the years. So with him, I'm not quite sure that he actually has a future at Arsenal. You guys can let me know in the chat box what you think about Guendouzi, but I think the good of Guendouzi is his passion and the fact that he's always kind of up for the game. You never have to ask whether or not Guendouzi is trying. He is trying, and he likes to take it upon himself to make the game happen. That's also his biggest flaw as well. When you want to play a more structured positional game, he tends to follow the ball. And he tends to be the type of person that works better with a system that is a little bit looser, a little bit, more free flowing, where he can get on the ball and kind of do whatever he wants. And that doesn't match up with Arteta. I think Unai Emery I think he had tactics, but for the most part, it was like, let me just get the players that are going to run around, and have legs and see what they can do. And Guendouzi really thrived in that kind of situation. Arteta is the complete opposite, where you're supposed to do something specific every single time that you get the ball. And if you don't do it, you're in trouble. And Guendouzi doesn't really fit in that. I think Arteta, based on how much he played him at the beginning of his tenure, I would say that he rates his talent, but he doesn't rate his attitude, and he doesn't believe that he can play a more structured positional, system, a more disciplined system. So for me, Guendouzi is somebody that we definitely have to move on. But the issue is that his reputation is kind of becoming an issue to the point where I'm not really sure if we would be able to recoup a fee for him that would match up to our valuation. I don't think anybody's taking a really big risk on him. We wanted 30 million. We're not going to get anything near there. We bought him for 8, and I would say at this point, because of where he is with his contract, if we could get anything over 8, it would probably be a win for us. Tony says, I'm not too worried about Guendouzi. Either we keep him and re-sign, or we'll find someone who can take a punt on a talented 22-year-old. That's the thing, though, like a punt on a 22-year-old that has some baggage. I'm not really sure if that's realistic in the pandemic market. What is a punt? Arsenal is going to hold on for at least 20 million. We're not about to give Guendouzi away for 10, 15 million. That's just not, he has too many appearances in the Premier League. He's old enough where you can kind of see what his talent looks like. So I think this is a little bit more difficult than moving him on to me is going to be more difficult, especially now we're getting towards the end of the season. And do we really hear about any suitors? I haven't heard of any suitors that are interested in bringing in Guendouzi permanently. And would Guendouzi be even interested in re-signing or signing another contract with Arsenal? They don't actually have to. Even if we offer him one, he could easily just say, no, I'm just going to run my deal down, and just sit around for a year. He doesn't really have to worry about, he's not going to get chosen for the Euros. So even if he sits out next season, what is that really going to do for him? So I don't know. I think it's going to be more difficult to move him on than maybe somebody like Maitland-Niles, because Maitland-Niles is not really known as somebody that is super immature. Maitland-Niles has his own issues, but I can see somebody being more interested in Maitland-Niles than Guendouzi because his reputation really precedes him. Tony says, if Guendouzi was at another club, I would take a punt on him. I don't know. It just depends on if you want to deal with the totality of Guendouzi. A lot of managers don't even want to deal with that. And you can kind of see that, their coach initially said at Hertha Berlin that he was a problem child. And then maybe 2 or 3 months later, just actually earlier this month, the director of football came out and did a little bit of damage control, it looked like, and kind of said that Guendouzi is a great player and has a great attitude and all this kind of stuff, which we know is kind of like, okay, that's the opposite of what you said, but Guendouzi, I think we're going to have a hard time moving him on. To me, that's what I think, to be honest. So let's see. Sean says that Robin Van Persie had a similar reputation, but look how he turned out. Robin Van Persie was world-class talent, so Guendouzi is not that, in my opinion. I think he's a couple notches lower. And, so I understand that. But, like, is there going to be an Arsene that's going to have enough time for him and be patient? Who is that manager that's that patient? I don't see him out there. I'm looking, So the fact that he's not being linked with anybody is a little bit worrying for me. But maybe somebody will. But if they do take a punt on him, they're going to want a significant discount. And will Arsenal be interested in selling somebody that has so many appearances for Arsenal and just a couple summers ago was probably worth about 40? Are they willing to take 15? I don't think so. So we'll see. You guys, I have my notes. I'm so old school, but I wrote them down and they need to be like near me. Sorry. I'm so old. So yeah, let's talk about Ainsley for a second. So Ainsley, his value is 20 million at the moment. It's around 20 million. And, I think Ainsley is one of those players that he has a lot of talent, but again, he's one of those that he hasn't developed that into like a true position or anything that we can really, define. It's not defined. It's not developed. It's not defined, but he has raw talent and we don't really know how to use it. I think Arteta was using his talent to the best of his ability, but the issue really became that Ainsley wanted to play a different position, and Arteta doesn't see him in that position. And up until this point, I haven't really seen many managers be interested in him as a midfielder. And even Wolves, when they wanted him for about 15 million or so over the summer, wanted him as a wingback. You know, he played for the English national team. He played wingback. So I think when the signs are leading you in a certain direction, you should probably, not ignore them. I rate Maitland-Niles for backing himself, but at the same time, I'm like, if all the managers that you're working with tell you that you are, a fullback, you probably are. That's where your talent kind of shines the most. And he can play midfield, but even him playing midfield, and at West Brom has been a little confusing because he's in the midfield, but he doesn't really get on the ball that often. He kind of breaks up play, but not that much. So it's kind of like, are you defensive? Are you offensive? Are you what? And sometimes he's working really hard, but other times, we know this very well about Ainsley Maitland-Niles is that he lacks concentration and he loses his mark. And so I'm not really sure about him, to be honest. Like, I think this loan move to me was shocking. I couldn't believe that instead of going to, Southampton or a team like that, he chose West Brom, who is most certainly going down, to play midfield for a team that doesn't have any possession. When I watch him play for West Brom, he doesn't touch the ball very often, and I just don't think that that's really making a case for him playing midfield, and definitely not playing midfield for a team that's above the relegation zone. So he also shot himself in the foot. I don't think he's going to the Euros. I wouldn't imagine him going. So I think it's just disappointing to me that I could see that he was going in a direction that could have been really fruitful for him. And it seems like he's going in another direction because he's very headstrong in a thought process about playing midfield. That doesn't really make sense to me. So with him, I like him and I think he's a good player, but I think this is somebody who I would want us to sell as soon as possible because I don't see his value increasing. Willock's value is increasing. I think Ainsley's is going to stay about where it is. And he spoke to, Sam Allardyce about why he came to West Brom. And essentially it was because he could play midfield. He does not want to play fullback. And, I don't think he's going to settle for a utility role or, somebody who can play utility positions and kind of play in multiple positions. I don't think he's going to settle for that. And I don't think he necessarily should. I just think that, he really could have been like the right back at Arsenal. We wouldn't, I think if he would have leaned into that a little bit more, he could have been the starting right back for Arsenal. And so he would be perfect to play in that kind of midfieldy type of pinched in role. He was playing that before when Hector was hurt. So just to see him really force this narrative or force this idea of being a midfielder is just a little strange for me. But I would like to see him sold in the summer, to be honest. I don't really see a way back, and I don't even think he wants to be at Arsenal anymore, to be honest. So let's see what you guys are saying. Gal says, Ainsley Maitland-Niles is done. He chose not to go on loan to Southampton. That was the final straw. I mean, yeah, I just couldn't believe that he chose to go to the relegation side over. I mean, Southampton hasn't had a very good season, but they're a better team than West Brom. And he chose to go to West Brom to play midfield for a team that doesn't have possession. You grew up playing, in the Arsenal Academy. So our whole game plan is around possession. So this isn't really selling you as a midfielder to me. But Cozy's Arsenal podcast says, hey, Jess, hey. You're saying, Jess, Guendouzi is good, but the EPL may not be the home for him. No, I don't. I agree with that. I think he'll do better in like Europe. Thinking back, did Emery have a better team than Arteta? I'm not sure. We'll come back to that towards the end. Ainsley is another versatile mediocre. His career is confusing. It is. I'm very confused by Ainsley Maitland-Niles. I think he was on the cusp of breaking into something that would really suit him, but it was going to take more work and patience, and he doesn't have that. He doesn't have the willingness to work for something that's not necessarily what he really wants in the long term. And you saw like how Bukayo Saka played an entire season at left back, which is not the position that he actually wants to play, but he did that. And you gain favor with managers when you do that, when you play, in a position that you don't actually want to play, but you do it for the team and you do it to the best of your ability. Then you gain favor with managers. Ainsley is kind of like, I'm only going to play really hard in the position that I actually want to be playing in. And I think that's a flawed way of going about things. Sometimes you have to give to get, and he doesn't seem to want to give much unless he's getting what he really wants. So he's very confusing to me because do you really want to be playing midfield in a team that doesn't have any possession? And he could be a really good right back / right wing back on a mid-table, maybe upper mid-table team in the Premier League, but you're only going to be able to play midfield in a team that's, lower towards the end. I don't get it. And if your dream is to play for the English national team, I don't know what you're doing. Let me stop. I don't want to slag him off too much. He's confusing to me. Yo-Yo says Ainsley is a passenger in midfield. There are many in the Premier League like Noble, Winks, McTominay that come to mind. Yeah, I think he just doesn't add much. When I'm watching him for West Brom, he doesn't touch the ball that often. And midfielders are the captains of the ship. They lead the team in the direction that they're supposed to be going, and he doesn't touch the ball. And then, usually it's like, okay, maybe he doesn't touch the ball because he's a defensive midfielder. He's not that either, so he really confuses me. And I'm kind of like, oh, I know that he's very athletic. I think he suits the Premier League in terms of his athleticism and his ability to cover large spaces and play for a long period of time and those types of things. But if he wants to play midfield, he's going to have to improve his passing. He can't be, a passenger. He can't concentrate and then turn off the lights. So he has a lot of work to do to become a midfielder that could play in the Premier League, so is he willing to do that? He's 24 years old, wow. Let me just stop. It just irritates me because I'm like, you could have been a right back / right wing back for Arsenal. They would have solved a lot of issues because I thought when he started playing there for Hector, I thought this is something. We have something here. If he can just lean into it and actually put effort into it. I mean, look at how, I'm not saying he put a little bit of effort, but you could kind of tell that he was going through the motions. If he had put just a couple more percentage of effort into that, he could have been really, really good at that position. Egal says Emery had more leaders and more. Okay, you guys are talking about is the team better now? We'll get to that towards the end. Albert says, of course I'm in the chat. Big up to you, Jess. Thanks, Albert. No more talk of anyone being sat down on loan and giving people more chances. Let's get a lot of the squad moved on. We are not Sentiment FC. Yeah, for sure. My thing about, I'm not trying to give people chances, to be honest. It's more, a lot of the situation that we're in terms of the numbers in the squad and the bloated aspect of the squad is going to determine whether or not we're going to be able to get rid of all these players, because as much as we want to move them on in like in one window, we're not going to be able to, because we need to make sure that we have the homegrown numbers. And it just so happens that the players that fall within the homegrown quota that actually qualify for it are the majority of the players that we actually want to move on. So I'm not into giving people more chances. The players that are out on loan, except for Saliba, are pretty much players that I'd want to get rid of, but we'll kind of get to it. But I honestly think at least one of Ainsley Maitland-Niles, Willock, Guendouzi are going to stay because we need to make the homegrown numbers. Stitch says, I think the loan move was essential for Ainsley Maitland-Niles. Hopefully he can see that in midfield is not the position for him. He seems very hell-bent on it. Maybe he thinks he's doing well, but when I watch West Brom play, I'm like, you were in the Arsenal Academy. Everything that they teach you there is about possession, so if you don't have possession, you're just not really selling you as a midfield that well, or as a midfielder. It's just weird. Do not waste the tweet says, good morning, Jess. It's definitely weird. KT gets all this praise and Ainsley doesn't see that the right back position he could fit into now. I mean, because that's the thing. It's Hector's leaving. So, but it's so far away now. It was so much closer last season when Hector was kind of in and out, and it seemed like Arteta was giving him a really good chance to make that position his own. And then, there was that period around January where they were saying that remember when he got the red card? He got a red card for doing like he was playing right back and he did a tackle, a dumb one, and got a red card. I remember that. I think it was like the Aston Villa game that we came back and won. And then after that, the rumblings around was like, okay, he doesn't want to play. He's said that out loud. He doesn't want to play right back. It was taken out of context or whatever. And then we end up with Cedric. It's just, I think Arteta did that because he couldn't trust Ainsley. Trust is big with Arteta. You can tell. And once you lose it, it's hard to get it back. And you see there's moments where Ainsley couldn't get a game. And I think that coincided with the time where Arteta was like, I don't trust you. There, were rumors about the way that he practices and that he doesn't put in he doesn't look engaged. And I could tell that even in the game. I know that you can say that he has this relaxed attitude, but I see the differences in the way that he plays when he's playing in positions that he actually wants to play in versus when he's not. There was a game against Liverpool where we were playing in like one of those cups. I think we got knocked out and he was playing in the midfield and he didn't look the same. He wasn't as aloof as he usually is. And I think his body language and the way that he plays is really based around if that's where he wants to be playing. And that's just not the right way to be. So I think this is the end. I don't think he can come back from this. I don't think he wants to. I think he's very, focused on becoming a midfielder. So that being said, I know that there are rumors about Crystal Palace may be interested, and I think he'll get bids. I really, really do. I think there are teams like Crystal Palace and even maybe Brighton that would be interested in a player like him, a versatile player and maybe they will allow him to play in the midfield, but he's definitely somebody that we need to sell. And I was very big on him moving on in the summer, and it didn't happen. I don't know what the reasoning was for it because then he didn't play at all. And then now he's out on loan, but this is the time to really move him on because if he had to come back, could you see him integrating himself back in and actually playing for the badge again? I just don't see it. Yeah, Bowie says, for me, Ainsley looks lazy on the pitch. Yeah. It comes off like I couldn't be bothered, and I know you can't read a lot into body language, but I've seen him look more engaged when he's playing in positions that he wants to be playing in. Yo-Yo says the club lacks midfield options with 2 players being loanees. I don't think the idea of several young midfield assets being shipped out in one window. Yeah, I agree with that. I think homegrown numbers and the lack of funds is going to be a big determining factors on whether we're able to move on. Because you have Ainsley, who's kind of like a midfielder, and Willock and Guendouzi and Torreira, and they're all midfielders. And do you really see us letting Danny Ceballos go and just having El Neni, Thomas, and Xhaka again? Even if we bring in Odegaard, that's not enough. We need midfield options. Even if you were to bring up Aziz, you still need another midfielder. So again, I think one of these players will stay, and just we'll get into it in a second, but as good as Willock is doing, I feel like he might be the one that needs to stay because Ainsley is not coming back and he's not really a midfield option. Guendouzi and Arteta's relationship is not great, and I just don't see him back at the Emirates unless nobody was interested in buying him or taking him. Willock is somebody that we could keep for another year and maybe still sell him in a year's time. As good as he's doing at Newcastle, I wouldn't be surprised if he stayed at Arsenal because we need to make that homegrown quota. And he's a midfielder that can play a little bit further ahead and in the pivot. And he's getting much needed game time to develop his talent. Just talking about Willock, what does he have, like 4 goals already or something? He has more goals in the time that he's been at West Brom than all of our midfield for the season. Willock is a strange one because he had the most appearances of any Arsenal player last season. But if you look back at those performances, I think he was highly criticized as being as a player that we couldn't pin down. We didn't understand what kind of player he was. Don't shoot me, but I see him as a Mueller type midfielder, not in talent level, not in quality, but in terms of he's good at playing off the striker, the way that Mueller plays off of Lewandowski, and he's not very skillful. He's not he's not technically brilliant, but he works really hard and gets into good positions to supply the team with good passes in the box, and also Lewandowski, and they play well off of each other. And I think that's the type of player that he is. Where he would fit in the Arsenal system at the moment is kind of like, I'm not really sure. But I would trust bringing in Willock a little bit more than keeping Ainsley Maitland-Niles, because he's literally not a midfielder. Willock is. So I think it's really interesting that he might be the one that has the most hype around him at the moment, but he might be the one that we need to keep. I really like Willock as a player. He frustrates me because I can't see where he would be in the system, but he can play in the pivot. And one of Arteta's biggest criticisms of him was his defensive contribution, and would he be switched on defensively? Because you can't play in the pivot and not be switched on defensively. But I think Willock, because of his athleticism and the fact that he's growing into himself and he has confidence, I would actually replace him, or replace Ceballos with him. I know Ceballos has good technical quality and stuff, but he doesn't have the athleticism that we need. So I don't know what you guys think about that. Would you be okay? Or like, let's say if Willock did stay, would you guys have a heart attack? Like, how would you guys feel? Because he's highly criticized amongst the fan base. I think because he doesn't, for a certain maybe group of the fan base, they don't really see him as the type of midfielder that they're used to. We're used to the Cess and the Santis, and he's completely different. But there's room out there for players like Willock, and he scores goals from midfield. And I just think his all-around game is better than the others. Let's see. KY says Joe is a baller. He has to stay, and he can fight it out with ESR. I mean, that's pretty much what it is. It's ESR or Willock, at this moment. But I mean, Willock could easily take Ceballos' position for me, easily. I don't think Ceballos is really adding a lot. And I think Willock is growing into himself. So, and it's good to have competition for places, don't you think? AK Gunner says, all you do is agree with whatever Arteta decides to do. I will keep Ainsley Maitland-Niles and Guendouzi and give a chance to Saliba. We cannot afford for Arteta to keep a grudge. Plus, those players are potential assets. Are you saying that all I do is agree with what Arteta decides to do? I mean, I actually don't. Saliba is one that I think will really hurt me if he doesn't bring him back. I've been very vocal about the fact that I think that was handled poorly, and I don't understand why Saliba's not in the team. So I don't always agree with what Arteta has to say or what he does, but I mean, his man management needs work, and I think he needs to give a little to get a little back from the players. I think his authoritarian nature is a little bit harsh, especially for young players. But I do like Arteta, so I do agree with a lot of the things that he does. So yeah, the Saliba thing, though, I don't agree with, actually. Aslan says, let's be real. Who do you think KLN Academy graduates have to look up to? The majority of our senior players are average at best. We don't have two players in every position that test each other. No, we don't. We don't have good competition for places. We have competition in kind of like competition in those front positions, but not to the extent that I think we should. And in the midfield and defense, we really don't have it. So I agree with that. I don't think the younger players have much to look forward to or much to look up to but Saka and Emile Smith-Rowe, and that's problematic, So yeah, I agree. Sean says Mueller is very intelligent. He is. He's very intelligent. But I think my point with that is just there's room for players that get into good positions and know how to find the pockets of space in the box to score goals from midfield. And although I think for Arsenal, we like technical players that are really good, in tight places and have good technical quality. And I know Willock is not that, but there's room for players that are intelligent to get into the box and things like that. So I think Willick does a good job with that. He doesn't just luck up in the box, that it's a skill to be able to make late runs into the box. I mean, we basically, that's why we love Aaron Ramsey, right? Is because that's something that he did on a regular basis. And Willick has that too. He's just not as clean, you know? Okay. So Tony says, would Basuma Buendia be homegrown? I don't understand the rules. So essentially, so the homegrown rules are here. Let me get my notes. A homegrown player is defined as by the Premier League is a player who one is 21 or older on January 1st of the year in which that season begins. Both of them are over that age, and has spent 3 years between the ages of 16 and 21 with the team in the English football system. That, I think that would mean that Basuma would not fit that because he's 24 and he's only been at Brighton for 2 years. So that would mean that he was about 22 when he came. So you need to have spent 3 years in the English footballing system between the ages of 16 and 21. So no, he wouldn't count. Buendia, I think, is like 24 years old. So I'm not really sure, but I don't think that he spent time at Norwich between the ages of 16 and 21 because he was somewhere else in like Spain. So I don't think either of those players would count, but somebody who probably would count is Max Aarons. So if we're looking to replace, our right back situation, I think Lamptey would not fit because he's like 19 or 18, but Max Aarons would because he's 21 years old. He's been, in the English footballing system for his entire life, so things to think about. Let's see. Justin says, hi, Jessica, how are you? I'm good. For Willock, we need a Giroud type of striker that lets midfielders run off of him. We have Abba now, so I'm not sure how he can work. Yeah, I remember the Leeds game. I thought, Willock was trying to play off of Aubameyang, but he couldn't because Aubameyang wasn't keeping the ball. And it was just like a strange fit. So I agree with that you need a certain type of striker to play off of when you're somebody like Willock. So maybe we don't have the right players around him to let him thrive. But that being said, in order to keep the homegrown numbers, compliant with the Premier League, if we just have to choose one off of the top of our head, that's the one I would choose, even if it's not a perfect fit at the moment. It's just, I can't see Ainsley Maitland-Niles back here. And because of Guendouzi and Arteta's relationship, I just don't see that working either. Let's see. Willock's attitude doesn't get in his way too. Yeah, so something about Willock that I really do like is that he seems like a very positive person. I don't know him, but he always seems like he's trying to do his best and he's just excited to be playing. So I do like that about him. He seems easygoing, and when he was told to go on loan, he went. Look at Reece Nelson, somebody that we continuously kind of asking, about why is he not getting playing time, is because he didn't do what the coaches or what the club required him to do to be an Arsenal player, which is go out on loan. He refused the loan and now he's here, but he's not playing. So Willock is doing the right things. Whether his career is long-term at Arsenal or not, I think he's doing the right things to be a successful player. And I just like to see him smile and like to see him happy. But if I had to snatch him back because we needed the homegrown numbers, I would, because the other ones just don't fit. So that's enough about Willock. You guys can disagree with me or agree with me in the comment section. That's cool. And so let's talk about Torreira. So obviously, I just think about Torreira and I just really think that we bottled this hard. We didn't do a good job nurturing this kid at all. He came to Arsenal after his deal with Napoli fell through. I don't know if, you guys know that, but essentially a deal was done for him to go to Napoli. And when it fell through, he chose Arsenal because he didn't want to stay at Sampdoria after, I think, what he played well in the World Cup, right? So he ended up at Arsenal and he never really settled in. I think that was kind of like obvious. Some rumors had come out later that he just didn't vibe with anybody on the team except for Emmy. And Emmy was kind of like, he's a goalkeeper, so you don't really get to spend a lot of time with him. And a lot of jokes about him being short and stuff like that. I mean, he seems like a sensitive guy. If they're constantly badgering you about being short, I can tell that's probably not, that nice for somebody like him. So he never really settled in, stuff with his family as well. And, London is very different than Italy and places like that, so maybe it was the weather and things like that. But I think the main thing was that Unai Emery played him out of position. I think that's when it broke him. He just never was the same player after Unai Emery started playing him in the 10 position. And I think up until that point, he was doing a good job. But the Premier League was in transition at that time, which I think if you guys notice, like just even like 3 years ago, the players that were good like 3 or 4 years ago are not suitable for the Premier League anymore. The player profiles change and what's required for players in terms of, athleticism and skill sets and things change. And I think because the games are so much more stretched and they're more like basketball games, Torreira is not the ideal CDM for that. You can do that in Italy, but in Premier League where it's run and gun and constant up and back, he's not the ideal person for that job. And Unai Emery obviously wanted somebody a little bit different. He had mentioned wanting Thomas Partey / Steven Nzonzi. Look at both of those players and their profiles. Their stature is completely different, the actual opposite of Torreira. So once he started playing him out of position, that was kind of the end. But I thought Torreira was a good player. And he was young enough where if all we had to do was keep his value up, so that we can at least recoup what we spent or paid for him. And we paid about 25 million or whatever from Sampdoria. And his value at the moment is still 25 million. So his value has not went down. I thought it was odd that he ended up going to Atletico in the midst of us trying to do the release clause for Thomas Partey. I don't know if we agreed to do it to try to get some sort of deal that obviously didn't go through, but Torreira was very adamant about going to Atletico and not going to one of the Italian teams that wanted him, and that also has not worked out for him. I thought that he would fit perfectly in a Simeone system, and because Simeone, I think, has diverted away from the really defensive structure that he was doing for the last couple of years and started trying to be a little bit more progressive, that left Torreira on the outskirts as well. And he has very good midfielders at his disposal. So Torreira just kind of comes in for little bit part roles. I like Torreira. And I feel really bad about what happened to his mom. And I know that that's really hurting him at the moment. And he wants to go to Boca Juniors. It's one of those things where I feel like Arsenal is going to do the right thing. I think the right thing in terms of getting him to where he wants to go, even if that doesn't mean that we get exactly what we want. Boca Juniors, I cannot imagine them having the amount of money that we would be asking for Torreira, but I think we'll make some sort of concession and allow him to go because Arteta, I don't think really it's not about he doesn't like him, but doesn't fit his system. So Torreira is somebody that I would think that would leave in the summer and maybe on a loan initially and then purchase, or we just take really, really small payments over a long period of time. But I think he'll end up back, because he wants to be closer to his family. And I think that's the right thing for him at this point, because he's not coming back to Arsenal, is he? So what do you guys think about Torreira and how his career has kind of went? Because I had high hopes for him. I rated him very highly, but when you see the way that the Premier League is moving, he just doesn't suit it, so that on top of the fact that he never really adapted, on top of the fact that Arteta's playing a different system, blah, 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 it's just not a good place for him. Yo-Yo says Torreira was vulnerable beside Xhaka in that double pivot, and having lost Rambo, Emery thought he was best equipped to trigger the counter press. He's a victim of Mislintat Raul power struggle. Yeah, for sure. It just didn't make sense, for a long time. And even now at the moment, our midfield doesn't make sense. It just doesn't. You could see that at the beginning of Arteta's tenure, he was trying to figure out how to make Xhaka, Guendouzi, Torreira some sort of thing in their mix, and also adding Danny Ceballos in there, trying to see if Ozil could work. And none of it really goes together. Even though Xhaka and Thomas works together to a certain extent, it's still not perfect. So I think we're working through the kinks and really just seeing the consequences of really poor squad building. And as you've said, Yo-Yo, the Mislintat Raul power struggle. has been a real issue for us. But with Torreira, yeah, I just think you have to have the right type of players around him, and Xhaka is not that, because they both just will get exposed, and you could just see it didn't work. And then Ceballos plus Xhaka doesn't work without an extra center back, And we also are less progressive with them because they can't bypass the first line of defense. It's just none of it works. Like none of it really works together. Let's see. King State says Torreira doesn't have the mentality to play for a big club. He is way too emotional. Almost every player have been played out of position. Get over it. He played 3 games as a number 10, not 100. I mean, he just strikes me as somebody that's really, really sensitive. And you can't be sensitive at Arsenal because nobody gets crapped on more than Arsenal players and Arsenal the club, so not only just being in a different environment and not adapting to the tactics slash the city, whatever. And then on top of the fact that Arsenal just has such a firestorm of constant criticism is not a place for somebody, as you've said, that's maybe a little bit emotional. But yeah, it's just I don't know. Torreira, he's emotional, whatever. Maybe he is, maybe he isn't, but it's just not the right place for him. You know what I mean? So yeah. Let's see. So that's it. We talked about Torreira, Ainsley, Willock, and Guendouzi. But now let's talk a little bit about Saliba. So Saliba is somebody that I think absolutely has to come back. Like without a shadow of a doubt. There's no way that this boy can stay on a loan another year because I think he'll force a move. There's just some young players that know that they're good. So I know Arteta wants everybody to be humble without any sort of ego, but that's just not realistic, And sometimes young players that have been hyped for a long time and know that they're good are not going to look around at Rob Holding and think, oh, I should be playing under this guy. No, and this is one of the times with Arteta that I really feel like he needs to soften up a little bit and just kind of give a little bit to get more. And Saliba's just one of those guys. I know that he may not start, but you need to integrate him in and give him something. I just can't imagine spending the amount of money that we have on him and just allowing it to just fizzle out because he didn't have the right ego. He wasn't humble enough for you, or whatever it is. This situation has been handled so poorly in every way imaginable, whether it was actually an admin issue that led to him not being actually registered in the squad, or if it had something to do with the fact that, Saliba was unhappy about not being at the cup final that they were in. It was handled poorly. It was handled horrendously. And he's been at the club for 2 years. We bought him the same time that we bought Pepe and David Luiz and all them came in, and he has yet to play for Arsenal Football Club. So going on to the 3rd year, I think it's time for Arteta to figure out a way to integrate him. I'm seeing that we're still being linked to right-sided center backs. That worries me a little bit. I'm like, why do we need another center back when we have a 19-year-old that's one of the best young center backs in the world? I know that there'll be growing pains and he's not going to be perfect, but if you don't bring them in and let them make the mistakes, then they'll never get there. Having him play in France is not going to get him really ready to play in England because it's not that similar. So for me, I just think Saliba has to be brought in. And if he's not, AK Gunner said that I just kind of agree with everything that Arteta does. This is one thing in particular that I just feel like if he doesn't bring Saliba back in, I don't know how I feel about Arteta because it just doesn't make sense. It was handled so poorly, and it doesn't make sense. And I just feel like it has something to do with he likes the young players that just kind of wait their turn, and Guendouzi and Saliba being the confident young players that they are. I'm not sure if that aligns with what Arteta wants. And so I'm making an assumption based on just kind of what I've seen. So it may not be true, but you can't expect every young player to be just like Saka. Saka is an angel. He's hardworking and humble, and not everybody is like that. So Saliba feels like he's good enough to play, and I'm sorry, he is. He's better than Holding, so just play the kid. Tony says Saliba becomes homegrown in the next years. Yeah, he would. So Saliba is one of those that, because we bought him and he's between the ages of, we bought him when he was 18. Was he 18? He might have been 18 when we bought him. So 18, 19, 20, he would be between the ages of 16 and 21, been a part of the English, footballing system for that amount of time. So he would become homegrown, and so would Gabby after a certain amount of time, I think. So they don't have to be English to become homegrown. It's kind of like Hector. He's homegrown, but he's Spanish, obviously, but it's because we brought him in at a certain time and he fit the criteria based on what the Premier League deems as a homegrown player. Yeah, and this is kind of so Saliba, we shouldn't expect him to be good immediately, and I don't. I'm afraid we're gonna lose the kid because we're being stubborn about things that don't make sense to me. Sometimes you have to give a little bit, and I see the only players that really get some additional leash, that are allowed to continuously make mistakes and do dumb things and come back in, are senior players. Young players are on such a tight leash, and I'm not sure if that's the right way to approach every single young player, because it's a big turnoff for some, especially when they're extremely talented like Saliba. And yeah, Taha, yeah, Arteta has trouble dealing with the star ego. That's kind of what it feels like a little bit, especially with young players. But I just sense this humble yourself thing, and I just don't think Saliba is going to really do that, because sometimes you just rate yourself, and I think Saliba rates himself over. I mean, we're talking about he's not getting in the team because of Rob Holding. That doesn't make sense to me. So I don't expect him to come straight in and do well, be perfect. You could play him with Marie. There people are like, well, he's never going to play Gabrielle and Saliba together. Maybe not, but you can play him with Marie. There's other options. So yeah, I want Saliba back in this team. Alexander says, Jess, keep Saliba, but still need a new right-sided center back to replace Holding, since David Luiz is also gone. But Holding is also a homegrown player, so can we afford to get rid of Holding? That's my thing. It's just that is a big issue for us because our squad is so overblown. I mean, we have like 25 on the roster, plus all the players that are out on loan that are going to come back in the summer unless they are sold. So it's just, yeah, I would rather just sell Holding, but he's homegrown, so I'm not sure if that would work, but I'm not sure I don't know. Is David Luiz actually going to leave? I mean, do we know that for sure? Let's see. Dana says all the best players believe in their sauce. And I think that's, players that are the good players believe in themselves and rate themselves. And when they're looking at the rest of the team and they're like, wow, I'm not playing over Holding. Wow, I'm not playing over El Neni. Wow, I'm not playing over this player, Nketiah, whatever. I just can imagine that it's like, what the hell, So yeah. And yes, right back is more important to right-sided center back. I agree with that, Yo-Yo. I think because of the amount of players that we have for the center back positions and the fact that you could just bring back in Saliba, it's not really that important. Focus on right back. Yep, Holding did get a new contract. So, and as much as I wanted to think that was to hold his value, I think it was because we're not going to get rid of him, and we just wanted to, I don't know, he was being congratulated or whatever for whatever he's done so far. So I think Holding will be here, and it's a matter of, will David Luiz get a new contract or not? And if that's the case, I mean, you have to bring Saliba. I don't care I don't care what's going on, just you need to bring Saliba back in. Sorry. Taha says, I didn't mean to imply you're expecting him to be a starter immediately. I was responding to the comments. Oh yeah. But yeah, just in general, I just agree with the fact that he's not going to be perfect, but you shouldn't expect him to be. And like, let's be real, is Rob Holding perfect? No. I mean, so yeah, but guys, I got a jet. I have to go because I have something. I have to actually leave the house and go do something. But I'll be back at 7 p.m. UK time to talk to Alex, the Euro expert, about what to expect from Unai Emery's Villarreal. So we'll talk about his tactics and what he's been doing and what we should expect. So that should be a fun stream. And then I'm actually going to do another stream after the Champions League games today. So should be fun. But like the video and subscribe to the channel. I really appreciate all of your comments and questions and just your support. It's been awesome. And yeah, but enjoy the rest of your day if I don't see you guys later. And if I do see you guys later, that would be awesome. All right, you guys, until next time. Bye.